In a faraway future, where humans had spread across the stars and built colonies on distant planets, there lived a man named Ryan Carter. He was not a soldier or a scientist, nor was he someone people would call a hero. Ryan was just an engineer, working aboard a small freighter called the Starlight Voyager. The ship wasn't shiny or new. It was old, patched up, and looked like it might fall apart at any moment. But Ryan loved it. To him, it was home. Ryan spent most of his days fixing things that broke, which happened often, and drinking coffee. Lots and lots of coffee. His co-pilot, Julia Adams, liked to joke that Ryan ran on caffeine more than oxygen. She wasn't entirely wrong. Without his trusty thermos full of hot black coffee, Ryan couldn't think straight. And when you're floating in space, thinking straight is kind of important. Julia was different from Ryan. Where Ryan was quiet and focused, always tinkering with something, Julia was lively and curious. She loved asking questions about everything, from how the engines worked to why Ryan drank so much coffee. Sometimes she teased him about it. "You know," she'd say with a grin, "if we ever run out of fuel, maybe we could power the ship with all the coffee you drink." Ryan would chuckle but never argue. After all, he knew she wasn't entirely joking. Coffee was his secret weapon. It kept him sharp, awake, and ready for whatever the universe threw at him. And the universe, as Ryan well knew, liked to throw surprises. On this particular day, Ryan and Julia were delivering supplies to a remote colony on the edge of known space. The trip had been long and boring, filled with empty stretches of nothingness between the stars. They passed the time by talking about random things, old Earth movies, strange alien foods they'd tried, and what they'd do if they ever won the Galactic lottery. Neither of them really expected anything exciting to happen. That's why when the ship's AI suddenly chimed with an urgent alert, both Ryan and Julia jumped in their seats. "What's going on?" Julia asked, leaning forward to check the console. "I don't know yet," Ryan replied, his voice calm but serious. He tapped a few buttons, bringing up the data on the main screen. What he saw made his eyebrows shoot up. This can't be right. The AI had detected a signal, a very specific one. It was called Galactic Emergency Protocol Code 17. Ryan had heard of it before, though only in training videos. Code 17 meant something terrible was happening, something that threatened the entire galaxy. It wasn't used lightly. In fact, Ryan couldn't remember hearing about it being activated even once in his lifetime. "Is it real?" Julia asked, her tone shifting from curiosity to concern. Ryan nodded slowly. "It looks real, but I need to confirm." He opened a channel to Central Command, the organization responsible for keeping peace and order across human space. Within moments, a stern-faced officer appeared on the screen. "This is Commander Harris of Central Command," the man said without preamble. "We have confirmed the activation of Galactic Emergency Protocol Code 17. A rogue black hole has formed near the Orion sector. It is expanding rapidly and consuming everything in its path. We estimate it will reach critical mass within 72 hours, endangering countless lives and potentially destroying entire star systems." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. Black holes weren't uncommon in space, but this one sounded different. This one wasn't natural. Someone or something had caused it, and now it was growing faster than anyone could stop it. "What are the orders?" Julia asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her eyes. Commander Harris hesitated for a moment before answering. "All available ships are being redirected to assist in containment efforts. However, due to your current location, the Starlight Voyager is uniquely positioned to investigate the anomaly directly. If you choose to proceed, report back immediately with any findings." Ryan glanced at Julia. She looked pale but determined. "What do you think?" she whispered. He thought for a moment. The smart thing to do would be to head straight to Central Command HQ, where they could join the larger effort. But something about the situation nagged at him. The Starlight Voyager wasn't fast or powerful, but it was flexible. Over the years, Ryan had modified it countless times, adding features no one else would think of. Maybe, just maybe, those modifications could make a difference. I want to check it out, Ryan finally said. There's got to be a reason the black hole formed here. If we can figure out the cause, we might find a way to stop it. Julia frowned. Are you sure? We're just a couple of engineers in a beat-up old freighter. What can we possibly do against something like that? Ryan shrugged. Probably nothing. But sitting around waiting for someone else to fix it doesn't feel right either. Besides, he held up his thermos with a lopsided smile. I've got coffee, and coffee solves everything. Julia rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Deep down, she trusted Ryan. He had a knack for solving problems even when the odds seemed impossible, so after a quick recalibration of their course, they set off toward the source of the disturbance. As they approached the area marked on their maps, the view outside the cockpit window grew darker. Stars disappeared one by one, swallowed by the immense gravitational pull of the black hole. Even from a safe distance, the sheer size of it was overwhelming. Ryan adjusted the sensors, trying to gather as much information as possible. There's something nearby, he muttered, squinting at the readings. A structure of some kind. It's not moving, so it's probably abandoned. Julia leaned over to look at the screen. Sure enough, a faint outline appeared in the distance, an old research station orbiting a dying star. Its surface was scarred and pitted, evidence of years of neglect. Think anyone's still alive in there? She asked. Ryan shook his head. Doubt it. But if this black hole started here, there might be answers inside. Let's take a closer look. With that, Ryan guided the Starlight Voyager toward the station. As they drew nearer, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The place looked dead, silent and foreboding. But Ryan reminded himself why they were there. Answers, and maybe even a solution, could be waiting inside. Grabbing his toolbox and thermos, Ryan turned to Julia. Ready? She took a deep breath and nodded. Let's hope your coffee works its magic again. Together they stepped out of the safety of their ship and into the unknown, unaware of the dangers and discoveries that lay ahead. The airlock hissed as Ryan and Julia stepped out of the Starlight Voyager and onto the derelict research station. The metallic surface beneath their boots was cold and covered in a fine layer of dust, evidence that no one had set foot here in years. A faint hum filled the silence coming from somewhere deep within the structure. It sounded almost alive, like the station itself was breathing. Ryan adjusted the flashlight on his wristband and glanced at Julia. Stay close, he said. We don't know what's waiting for us in there. Julia nodded, gripping her scanner tightly. She wasn't scared. Well, not entirely, but the eerie atmosphere made her skin crawl. The station looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Tools were scattered across the floor. Papers floated lazily in the low gravity and lights flickered sporadically along the walls. It was as if time had frozen mid-disaster. They moved cautiously through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Ryan stopped occasionally to examine pieces of equipment or scribble notes on a tablet. Julia kept her eyes peeled for anything unusual, though everything about this place already felt strange. After a few minutes, they reached what appeared to be the main lab. The door slid open with a groan, revealing a room cluttered with monitors, wires, and half-finished experiments. Papers were pinned to every available surface, covered in equations and diagrams that neither Ryan nor Julia could fully understand. In the center of the room stood a large machine, its casing cracked and sparking faintly. Whatever it was, it looked important. This must be where it all went wrong, Ryan muttered, stepping closer to inspect the device. He ran his fingers over the damaged panels, trying to piece together how it worked. Looks like some kind of dark matter manipulator. Dark matter? Julia asked, raising an eyebrow. Isn't that dangerous? Ryan shrugged. It's supposed to be stable, if handled properly. But judging by the state of this thing, he gestured to the chaos around them. Something clearly went very, very wrong. Julia scanned the area, her device picking up residual energy readings. There's still some power running through this place, she said. Maybe we can find logs or recordings to figure out what happened. Ryan nodded and began searching through the debris. He opened drawers, flipped through notebooks, and sifted through piles of data chips. Most of it was technical jargon that didn't make much sense, but one phrase kept appearing. Again and again. Project Abyss. What's Project Abyss? Julia asked, holding up a crumpled sheet of paper. I'm not sure yet, Ryan replied, frowning. But it seems like they were trying to harness dark matter as an energy source. If they succeeded, it would have been revolutionary. Infinite power, no waste. But they didn't succeed, Julia finished for him. Instead, they created a black hole. Ryan sighed. Yeah, looks like it. And now we're stuck cleaning up their mess. As they continued their search, Ryan stumbled upon a partially intact terminal. With a bit of tinkering, he managed to boot it up. The screen flickered to life, displaying fragmented video files. One of them caught his attention, a recording labeled Final Log. Let's watch this, Ryan said, motioning for Julia to come closer. The video showed a scientist, his face pale and drawn, speaking directly into the camera. His voice trembled as he explained the situation. We underestimated the instability of dark matter when exposed to concentrated gravitational fields, he said. The containment field collapsed and the resulting singularity began consuming everything around us. Evacuation is impossible. Escape pods are offline. All we can do now is document our failure and hope someone else learns from our mistakes. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving Ryan and Julia staring at the blank screen in stunned silence. Well, Julia said after a moment, breaking the tension. That's grim. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, thinking hard. If they couldn't stop it, maybe we can at least slow it down. There has to be something here we can use. He turned back to the broken machine in the center of the room. Despite its damaged state, it still emitted a faint hum, suggesting it hadn't completely shut down. Ryan knelt beside it, examining the wiring and circuits. This might be salvageable, he murmured. If I can reroute the power supply and stabilize the core. Julia watched nervously as he worked, occasionally handing him tools from his toolbox. Time seemed to stretch on forever as Ryan carefully repaired the device, muttering to himself, under his breath. At one point, he accidentally bumped the thermos of coffee he'd brought with him, spilling a small amount onto the machine's exposed circuits. Whoops, Ryan said, wincing. Sorry about that. To everyone's surprise, the machine suddenly sparked to life. Lights blinked on and the humming grew louder and steadier. Julia stared at Ryan in disbelief. Did you just fix it with coffee? Ryan grinned sheepishly. Hey, I told you coffee solves everything. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Julia couldn't help but laugh. You're ridiculous, but I guess it works. Now that the machine was operational, Ryan studied the readouts on its display. It's called a quantum harmonizer, he explained. From what I can tell, it was designed to control gravitational forces. If we can get it working properly, maybe we can use it to stabilize the black hole, or at least slow its growth. That's great, Julia exclaimed. But how do we get it off the station? It's huge. Ryan scratched his head. We'll have to improvise. Let's see if we can detach it and transport it back to the Starlight Voyager. We'll worry about the details later. With renewed determination, they set to work dismantling the harmonizer. It was heavy and awkward to carry, but between the two of them, they managed to lug it back to their ship. By the time they secured it in the cargo bay, both were exhausted and covered in grease. As they sat in the cockpit, catching their breath, Julia looked at Ryan. Do you really think this thing can save the galaxy? Ryan sipped from his thermos, considering the question. Honestly, I don't know, but it's the best shot we've got, and if nothing else, it gives us something to try. Julia smiled faintly. You always manage to stay optimistic even when things look hopeless. Ryan shrugged. Optimism keeps me going. That, and caffeine. The Starlight Voyager hummed softly as they prepared to leave the station behind. Outside the viewport, the black hole loomed larger than ever, its swirling mass casting a shadow over the stars. Ryan tightened his grip on the controls, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. All right, he said, glancing at Julia. Let's go save the galaxy. She nodded, her expression resolute. One cup of coffee at a time. With that, they fired up the engines and set a course for the heart of the danger. The journey ahead would be risky, possibly deadly, but neither of them hesitated. They had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Back aboard the Starlight Voyager, Ryan and Julia wasted no time getting to work. The quantum harmonizer sat in the cargo bay, its circuits glowing faintly, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing it, and possibly their lives, on the derelict station. But fixing it was only half the battle. Now came the hard part, figuring out how to use it against the black hole. Ryan knelt beside the device, his toolbox spread out around him. He worked methodically, tightening loose bolts, replacing damaged wires, and recalibrating settings that had been scrambled during their escape. Every so often he paused to sip from his thermos, the steady stream of caffeine keeping his mind sharp despite the overwhelming pressure. Julia hovered nearby, scanning the harmonizer with her handheld device. "Are you sure this thing can handle the strain?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "It looks like it's barely holding together." Ryan wiped sweat from his brow and glanced up at her. "Honestly, no, I'm not sure. But we don't have any other options. If we don't try, the black hole will keep growing until there's nothing left." Julia sighed but nodded. She trusted Ryan's instincts, even if the situation seemed impossible. "All right, genius. What do you need me to do?" "Help me. Test the power output," Ryan replied, handing her a diagnostic tool. "We need to make sure it can generate enough energy to affect the black hole without blowing itself apart." For hours they worked side by side, running simulations and tweaking adjustments. Sparks flew occasionally as Ryan pushed the harmonizer beyond its intended limits, but each time it held together, barely. The machine wasn't designed for something as massive as stabilizing a rogue black hole, but Ryan's improvisations gave it a fighting chance. Meanwhile, news of the impending catastrophe spread across the galaxy. Panic rippled through colonies and space stations as evacuation efforts began in earnest. Ships fled the affected regions, carrying terrified passengers desperate to escape the black hole's reach. Central Command issued constant updates urging everyone to stay calm and follow emergency protocols. But calm was in short supply. Videos surfaced online showing entire planets being consumed by the relentless void. Streams of debris spiraled into the black hole's gaping maw, swallowed whole without a trace. Scientists debated whether it could be stopped at all, some arguing that humanity's survival depended on abandoning the galaxy altogether. Amidst the chaos, Ryan and Julia remained focused. They tuned out the noise, concentrating instead on their task. Failure wasn't an option, not when the stakes were this high. As the hours dragged on, Ryan grew increasingly weary. His hands trembled slightly as he soldered another connection, and his eyelids felt heavier with each passing minute. Julia noticed and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You need to rest," she said firmly. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Ryan shook his head. "There's no time. We've got maybe 36 hours before the black hole reaches critical mass. Every second counts." Julia crossed her arms. "And what happens if you burn out halfway through? Who's going to finish fixing this thing then?" He hesitated, knowing she had a point. Finally, he relented. "Fine. 5 minutes." "That's all I'll take." She rolled her eyes. 5 minutes won't cut it. Sit down, drink your coffee, and let me handle the next round of tests. You've done enough for now." Reluctantly, Ryan obeyed. He slumped into a nearby chair, clutching his thermos like a lifeline. Julia took over, carefully following his instructions as she ran diagnostics on the harmonizer. Her movements were slower and less confident than Ryan's, but she managed well enough to keep things moving forward. While Julia worked, Ryan closed his eyes briefly, letting the caffeine kick in. His mind raced with thoughts of the mission ahead. It wasn't just about saving the galaxy, it was personal now. If they failed, everything he cared about would be lost. Friends, family, memories, they'd all vanish into the void. "Hey," Julia's voice broke through his thoughts. "I think I found something." Ryan opened his eyes and stood up quickly. What is it? She pointed to the screen displaying the harmonizer's readings. The energy output is stable, but the cooling system is still a problem. Without a way to regulate the temperature, the harmonizer will overheat the moment we activate it. Ryan frowned. That's bad. Really? Bad? Julia nodded. Yeah, any ideas? He rubbed his temples, thinking hard. Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached for his nearly empty thermos. What if we use this? Julia stared at him. Coffee? Seriously? It's liquid, right? And it's cold. Or at least cooler than the harmonizer's core. Maybe it'll buy us some time. She raised an eyebrow. You want to pour coffee into a piece of advanced technology? Ryan shrugged. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Besides, it worked earlier. Julia couldn't argue with that logic. All right, fine. Let's hope your coffee obsession saves us again. With renewed determination, they prepared the harmonizer for deployment. Ryan rigged up a makeshift coolant system using spare tubing and connectors, ensuring the coffee would flow directly into the overheating components. It wasn't elegant, but elegance didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was making it work. By the time they finished, the Starlight Voyager was already approaching the edge of the black hole's influence. The ship shuddered violently as gravitational forces pulled at its hull. Alarms blared, warning them of structural stress, but neither Ryan nor Julia paid attention. They had bigger concerns. We're almost in position, Julia announced, gripping the controls tightly. Once we're close enough, you'll need to activate the harmonizer manually. Ryan nodded, his pulse racing. Got it. Just get us as close as you can without tearing the ship apart. Julia maneuvered the Starlight Voyager closer to the swirling vortex, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. Outside the viewport, the black hole loomed larger than ever, its event horizon stretching endlessly across the void. Stars disappeared one by one, consumed by its insatiable hunger. Ryan positioned himself near the harmonizer, ready to trigger the activation sequence. On my mark, he called out. Julia braced herself, her eyes glued to the navigation console. Ready. 3, 2, 1. Now. Ryan pressed the button and the harmonizer roared to life. A burst of energy shot outward, colliding with the black hole's gravitational field. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the swirling mass began to stabilize, its expansion halting as the harmonizer's pulse created a counterforce. Yes, Julia shouted, punching the air in triumph. It's working! But their celebration was short-lived. Warning. Lights flashed across the harmonizer's display, signaling an imminent overload. The coolant system struggled to keep up, the coffee barely managing to stave off disaster. We need more time, Ryan yelled, frantically adjusting the settings. Keep us steady. Julia gritted her teeth, fighting to maintain their precarious position. The ship groaned under the strain, metal creaking ominously as the black hole fought back. Inside the cargo bay, sparks flew as the harmonizer pushed past its limits. Come on, Ryan muttered, pouring the last of his coffee into the coolant reservoir. Don't give up on me now. Finally, with a deafening hum, the harmonizer stabilized. Its energy output surged, creating a barrier that forced the black hole to shrink, ever so slightly. The immediate threat was neutralized for now. Ryan collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. That was insane. Julia smiled weakly, leaning back in her seat. You did it. Again. He shook his head. No, we did it. Together. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the black hole retreated, its destructive force temporarily contained. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, but relief washed over them too. Against all odds, they had succeeded. For the first time in days, Ryan allowed himself a small smile. See? Told you coffee solves everything. Julia laughed softly. Remind me never to doubt you again. Outside the viewport, the stars began to reappear, shining brightly against the darkness. The galaxy was safe, for now. But Ryan knew. Their journey wasn't over yet. There was still much to do, and countless challenges lay ahead. As the Starlight Voyager drifted away from the black hole, Ryan raised his thermos in a silent toast. To caffeine, he said quietly. And to hope. Julia joined him, raising an imaginary cup. To caffeine, hope. And whatever comes next. The Starlight Voyager floated silently in space, its battered hull groaning softly as it drifted away from the black hole. Ryan and Julia sat in the cockpit, both physically and mentally drained, but alive. The quantum harmonizer had done its job, for now. The black hole's expansion had slowed, and its gravitational pull no longer threatened to tear apart nearby star systems. But neither of them could fully relax. They knew this was only a temporary fix. Ryan leaned back in his seat, clutching his thermos like it was his last lifeline. Well, he said with a weary sigh. That worked better than I expected. Julia glanced at him, her expression somewhere between relief and disbelief. You mean you weren't sure it would work? He shrugged sheepishly. I mean, I hoped it would. But let's be honest, most of what we did was guesswork. We got lucky. Lucky? Julia repeated, raising an eyebrow. You call stabilizing a rogue black hole lucky? That's not luck, Ryan. That's skill. And coffee. Lots and lots of coffee. Ryan chuckled weakly, taking another sip from his thermos. Yeah. Well, if you ever write a book about this, make sure you mention the coffee. It deserves all the credit. Despite their exhaustion, there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. They had faced the impossible and somehow come out on top. But as the adrenaline faded, reality began to sink in. The black hole wasn't gone, it was just contained for the moment. Without a permanent solution, the galaxy was still in danger. We need to figure out what happens next, Julia said, breaking the silence. That harmonizer won't hold forever. Sooner or later it'll overheat again and then we're back to square one. Ryan nodded grimly. I know. But right now, I'm too tired to think straight. Let's give ourselves a few minutes to recover before we start planning world domination, or whatever comes after saving the galaxy. Julia smirked. World domination sounds nice. Maybe we can rule the galaxy from the comfort of this old freighter. They shared a laugh, the tension easing slightly. Humor was their way of coping with the overwhelming weight of responsibility. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to feel human again, just two ordinary people who had stumbled into extraordinary circumstances. But the reprieve didn't last long. As they rested, the ship's AI chimed with an incoming transmission. On the screen appeared Commander Harris of Central Command, his face pale and drawn. Behind him, chaos reigned, a flurry of activity as officers scrambled to coordinate evacuation efforts and emergency response teams. Carter, Adams, Harris began without preamble. We've received reports of your success. The black hole's growth has stabilized thanks to your actions. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We stopped it temporarily, sir, but the harmonizer isn't a permanent solution. It needs more time and resources to handle the strain. Harris nodded gravely. Understood. Unfortunately, time is something we don't have. The black hole is already destabilizing star systems across multiple sectors. Entire colonies are being evacuated as we speak. If it resumes expanding, the consequences will be catastrophic. Julia leaned forward, her voice firm despite her fatigue. What do you want us to do? Harris hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Central Command is assembling a task force to address the situation. Scientists, engineers, and military personnel are en route to your location. Your expertise, and that device of yours, will be critical to their efforts. Until they arrive, you must maintain the harmonizer's stability at all costs. Ryan exchanged a glance with Julia. Neither of them liked the sound of that. Maintaining the harmonizer meant staying dangerously close to the black hole, risking their lives every second they remained in its influence. And if the harmonizer fails before they get here? Ryan asked bluntly. Harris's expression darkened. Then humanity's survival rests entirely on your shoulders. You'll have to find another way to stop it. The line went silent for a moment, the weight of those words hanging heavily in the air. Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Understood, sir. We'll do our best. As the transmission ended, Julia turned to Ryan. Do you think we can pull this off again? Honestly? Ryan stared at the viewport, watching the black hole loom ominously in the distance. Honestly? I don't know. But we've got no choice. We've come this far. We can't quit now. With renewed determination, they returned to the cargo bay where the quantum harmonizer hummed steadily. Its energy output was holding, but warning lights blinked persistently, signaling overheating issues. Ryan knelt beside the machine, inspecting its fragile components. We need to reinforce the cooling system, he muttered, grabbing tools from his toolbox. If we can stabilize the temperature, we might buy ourselves more time. Julia joined him, scanning the device with her handheld scanner. How much coolant do we have left? Ryan frowned. Not enough. We used up almost everything during the first activation. Unless we can find something else to use. Julia's eyes lit up suddenly. Wait a minute. What about the station? There might be spare parts or materials we can salvage. Ryan considered the idea. It was risky. They'd have to leave the safety of the Starlight Voyager and venture back into the derelict research station. But they didn't have many options. All right, he said finally. Let's suit up and head back. Just be careful. That place isn't exactly stable. Minutes later, they were back aboard the station, moving quickly through its darkened corridors. The eerie silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional creak of metal as the structure shifted under the black hole's pull. They split, up to cover more ground, communicating via comms. I found something. Julia's voice crackled over the headset. Looks like a storage room filled with coolant tanks. Ryan hurried to join her, his heart racing. Sure enough, the room was stocked with containers marked thermal regulator fluid. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. This should do the trick, Ryan said, loading the tanks onto a makeshift cart. Let's grab as much as we can carry and get out of here. As they worked, the station trembled violently, throwing them off balance. Alarms blared, warning of structural failure. The black hole's gravitational forces were intensifying, pulling the station closer to its event horizon. We need to move, Julia shouted, panic creeping into her voice. Now! They abandoned the cart, carrying as many tanks as they could manage, and sprinted toward the airlock. The walls groaned around them, metal twisting and buckling under the strain. By the time they reached the Starlight Voyager, the station was beginning to collapse. Go, go, go! Ryan yelled as they sealed the airlock behind them. Julia wasted no time firing up the engines, and the ship shot away just as the station crumbled into the black hole. Back aboard the Starlight Voyager, they immediately set to work installing the new coolant system. Ryan rigged up a network of pipes and valves connecting the tanks to the harmonizer's core. Julia monitored the readings, ensuring the flow rate was consistent. It's working, she announced after a few tense minutes. Temperatures stabilizing. Ryan let out a shaky breath, collapsing onto the floor. Good. Now we just need to keep it running until help arrives. For hours, they alternated between monitoring the harmonizer and resting briefly in shifts. The strain of constant vigilance wore on them, but they refused to give up. Every so often, Ryan would take a sip of coffee, savoring the familiar warmth as it fueled his resolve. You know, Julia said quietly during one of their rare moments of calm, if anyone had told me a week ago that I'd be helping save the galaxy with a guy who drinks coffee like it's water, I wouldn't have believed them. Ryan smiled faintly. And if anyone had told me I'd be doing it with an old freighter and a broken machine, I'd have laughed in their face. Julia chuckled softly. Guess life has a funny way of surprising us. Outside the viewport, the black hole continued to swirl menacingly, its presence a reminder of the fragility of existence. But inside the Starlight Voyager, hope burned brightly. Against all odds, Ryan and Julia had proven that even the smallest acts of courage and ingenuity could make a difference. As they prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, Ryan raised his thermos in a quiet toast. To caffeine, he said with a grin, and to never giving up. Julia clinked her imaginary cup against his. To caffeine's stubbornness and the galaxy's luckiest engineers. The hours dragged on aboard the Starlight Voyager as Ryan and Julia worked tirelessly to keep the quantum harmonizer running. The black hole loomed outside their viewport, its swirling mass a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Every beep from the harmonizer's display felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment it might fail again. Despite their best efforts, the machine was showing signs of strain. Warning lights blinked persistently, and the coolant system Ryan had rigged up was barely keeping pace with the overheating core. They knew it was only a matter of time before something gave way. "We're running out of options," Julia said, her voice heavy with worry. "If we don't get reinforcements soon, this thing is going to burn out." Ryan nodded grimly, his hands moving quickly over the controls. "I know, but we've got to hold on until then. We can't afford to lose this fight now." Julia glanced at him, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept properly in days, surviving on caffeine and sheer determination. She admired his resilience but worried about how much longer he could keep going. "You need to rest," she insisted for what felt like the 100th time. "You're no use to anyone if you collapse." Ryan shook his head stubbornly. "Not yet. I'll rest when this is over." Julia sighed, knowing there was no point arguing. Instead, she focused on monitoring the harmonizer's readings, double-checking every adjustment Ryan made. Together, they formed a rhythm, him fixing problems. As they arose, her keeping an eye on the bigger picture. As they worked, the ship's AI chimed once more, signaling an incoming transmission. On the screen appeared Commander Harris, his expression tense but hopeful. Behind him, the chaos of Central Command had intensified, with officers shouting orders and screens flashing with data. "Carter, Adams," Harris began, cutting straight to the point. "Our task force is en route to your location. ETA is approximately 12 hours. Can you maintain the harmonizer until then?" Ryan exchanged a glance with Julia before answering. "We'll do our best, sir, but the harmonizer's struggling. If it fails before you arrive?" Harris nodded solemnly. "Understood. Do whatever it takes to keep it stable. Reinforcements are mobilizing as we speak." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Ryan and Julia alone with their thoughts. 12 hours sounded manageable in theory, but given the state of the harmonizer, it felt like an eternity. "We'll make it," Ryan said firmly, more to himself than to Julia. "We have to." Julia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her attention back to the harmonizer, scanning its systems for any weak points. Her scanner beeped suddenly, highlighting a section of the cooling system that was beginning to degrade. "Ryan," she called out urgently, "we've got a problem. One of the coolant lines is clogged. If it shuts down completely, the whole system could fail." Ryan cursed under his breath and rushed to inspect the issue. Sure enough, a blockage had formed in one of the pipes, restricting the flow of coolant. Without hesitation, he grabbed a wrench and set to work clearing it. Julia watched anxiously as sparks flew and metal groaned under the pressure. For several tense minutes, it seemed like nothing was working. Then, with a sudden rush, the coolant surged through the line again, stabilizing the temperature. "That should buy us some time," Ryan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But we need to keep an eye on it. This thing isn't built to last forever." Julia nodded, her heart still racing from the close call. "Let's hope 12 hours is enough." As the hours ticked by, the strain began to take its toll. The harmonizer emitted loud, grinding noises and its energy output fluctuated unpredictably. Ryan and Julia worked side by side, addressing each new crisis as it arose. Their movements became mechanical, driven by instinct rather than thought. At one point, Ryan paused to refill his thermos, realizing it had been empty for longer than he cared to admit. As he sipped the hot liquid, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. How had they gotten here? Just a few days ago, they were ordinary engineers delivering supplies across the galaxy. Now they were holding the fate of humanity in their hands. "This is insane," Julia muttered, echoing his thoughts. Who would have thought saving the galaxy would involve so much duct tape and coffee? Ryan chuckled weakly. "Welcome to my life. Always improvising, always just barely scraping by." Despite the humor, there was a deep truth in his words. Everything they had accomplished so far had been born out of necessity and creativity. They didn't have advanced tools or endless resources. They had grit, determination, and a refusal to give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the AI chimed again. "Incoming vessels detected," it announced. "Task force arrival imminent." Ryan and Julia exchanged a look of relief. They hurried to the cockpit where a fleet of ships appeared on the horizon. Sleek cruisers, cargo vessels loaded with supplies, and even a few fighter escorts surrounded the Starlight Voyager, forming a protective perimeter around the Black. While a new transmission came through, this time from Admiral Carter, a stern woman with sharp features and an authoritative voice. "This is Admiral Carter of the Galactic Fleet. Your actions have bought us valuable time, but the situation remains critical. Prepare to transfer control of the quantum harmonizer to our engineering team." Ryan hesitated for a moment before responding. "Understood, Admiral. But be careful. The harmonizer's unstable. It's held together with spit and prayers at this point." Admiral Carter raised an eyebrow. "Spit and prayers, huh? Sounds like you've done impressive work. Stand by for docking procedures." Within minutes, engineers boarded the Starlight Voyager, marveling at the makeshift modifications Ryan and Julia had implemented. They worked quickly to integrate the harmonizer into a larger system designed to handle the immense energy required to combat the black hole. As the scientists and engineers took over, Ryan and Julia retreated to the cockpit, watching silently as the task force deployed massive devices around the black hole. These machines, far more advanced than the quantum harmonizer, created a synchronized pulse that gradually shrank the void. "It's working," Julia whispered. Her voice filled with awe. "They're actually doing it." Ryan nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They had done the impossible, not alone, but as part of something greater. Their small, improvised efforts had paved the way for a collective solution. When the black hole finally stabilized and began to dissipate entirely, cheers erupted across the fleet. Messages of gratitude flooded in from colonies and star systems that had been saved from destruction. Humanity's future, once teetering on the brink of disaster, was secure once more. Admiral Carter contacted them one final time. "Carter, Adams, you've earned the thanks of the entire galaxy. Your ingenuity and bravery will not be forgotten." Ryan smiled faintly, glancing at Julia. "Just doing our job, ma'am." After the task force departed, leaving the Starlight Voyager alone in space once more, Ryan and Julia sat quietly in the cockpit. The weight of their journey settled over them, but so did a profound sense of accomplishment. "Well," Ryan said, finally raising his thermos in a mock toast, "guess we saved the galaxy." Julia grinned, clinking her imaginary cup against his. "And all it took was a broken freighter, a busted machine, and a lot of coffee." Ryan laughed softly, feeling lighter than he had in days. "Here's to hoping we never have to do that again." Julia nodded. "Agreed. Next time, let someone else save the galaxy." For now, though, they allowed themselves a moment to bask in the quiet victory. Outside the viewport, the stars twinkled brightly, a testament to the resilience of both the universe and the people who called it home. The Starlight Voyager drifted silently through space, its battered hull reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. Ryan and Julia sat in the cockpit, watching as the remnants of the black hole faded into nothingness. The galaxy was safe, but the quiet that followed felt strange after days of chaos and constant danger. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe easy. Ryan leaned back in his seat, cradling his thermos like an old friend. "You know," he said, thoughtfully, "I never imagined I'd be sitting here sipping coffee after saving the galaxy." Julia chuckled softly, her eyes still fixed on the viewport. "Yeah, me neither. I always figured heroes were supposed to wear capes or have cool ships. Not this." She gestured around the cluttered cockpit, where tools lay scattered and wires dangled from the ceiling. The Starlight Voyager wasn't glamorous, it was patched up, messy, and far from perfect. But it had gotten them through everything, just like Ryan's endless supply of caffeine and determination. "We didn't need capes," Ryan replied with a grin. "Just duct tape, coffee, and a little bit of luck. Julia smiled, shaking her head. And stubbornness, don't forget stubbornness. Fair point, Ryan admitted. But hey, if we hadn't been stubborn, who knows what would have happened? They fell silent for a moment, letting the enormity of their achievements sink in. It wasn't every day, or even every lifetime, that someone played such a crucial role in preventing galactic catastrophe. Yet here they were, two ordinary people who had risen to the occasion when it mattered most. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion crept in. Ryan's hands trembled slightly from lack of sleep, and Julia's eyelids drooped despite her best efforts to stay alert. They had pushed themselves to their limits, and now their bodies demanded rest. You should get some sleep, Julia said, finally glancing at Ryan. You look like you're about to pass out. He opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself. She was right. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept properly. Fine, he muttered, standing up slowly. But wake me up if anything happens, even if it's just a weird noise. Julia rolled her eyes. Don't worry, I will. Go crash before you actually do. Ryan nodded gratefully and shuffled toward the small sleeping quarters at the back of the ship. As he collapsed onto the narrow cot, his mind replayed the events of the past few days. The derelict station, the quantum harmonizer, the relentless black hole. All of it felt surreal now, like fragments of a dream. He drifted off quickly, lulled by the hum of the ship and the comforting knowledge that the galaxy was safe. Meanwhile, Julia stayed in the cockpit, keeping watch over the stars. She wasn't tired, not yet anyway. Her thoughts wandered as she stared out at the vast expanse of space. What came next? Would life return to normal, or had this experience changed them too much? She glanced down at the controls, remembering how close they had come to failure. If Ryan hadn't spilled coffee on the harmonizer, if they hadn't scavenged coolant from the station, if any one of 100 things had gone differently, the outcome might have been catastrophic. It made her realize just how fragile existence really was, and how remarkable it was that humanity kept finding ways to survive. After a while, Julia decided to check on the ship's systems. Everything seemed stable, but she ran diagnostics anyway, double-checking readings and recalibrating settings. It was something to do, a way to keep busy until Ryan woke up. Hours later, he emerged from the sleeping quarters looking marginally more rested. His hair stuck up in odd directions and his shirt was wrinkled, but there was a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Morning, he said groggily, heading straight for the coffee maker. How's everything holding up? Still, floating, Julia replied with a smirk. No thanks to your questionable piloting skills. Ryan shot her a mock-offended look as he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. Hey, my piloting is top-notch. You're just jealous because I can drink coffee and fly at the same time. Julia laughed, shaking her head. Sure, let's go with that. They spent the next few hours tidying up the ship, repairing minor damage sustained during their mission, and restocking supplies. It was mundane work compared to stabilizing a black hole, but it felt good to focus on something simple for a change. Eventually, they received another transmission from Central Command. Admiral Carter appeared on the screen, her expression softer than before. Carter, Adams, she began. We wanted to personally thank you for your service. Your actions have earned you commendations from the highest levels of government. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Commemorations? Really? Admiral? Carter nodded. Yes, medals, awards, the works. You'll also receive offers for advanced positions within Central Command and other organizations. We'd be honored to have you aboard. Julia exchanged a glance with Ryan, both of them thinking the same thing. While the recognition was nice, neither of them wanted to trade their freedom for fancy titles or prestigious roles. Thank you, Admiral, Ryan said politely, but we're happy right where we are. This old freighter may not be much, but it's home. Admiral Carter smiled faintly, as if she'd expected that answer. Very well. If you ever change your mind, the offer stands. In the meantime, consider yourselves honorary members of the Galactic Fleet. With that, the transmission ended, leaving Ryan and Julia alone once more. They looked at each other and burst into laughter. Honorary members of the Galactic Fleet, Julia repeated, shaking her head. That's got a nice ring to it. Ryan grinned. Yeah, but don't let it go to your head. We're still just delivery drivers at heart. Over the following days, news of their heroics spread across the galaxy. Media outlets hailed them as unlikely saviors, sharing images of the Starlight Voyager and interviews with scientists who credited their ingenuity with turning the tide against the black hole. People sent messages of gratitude, showering them with praise and admiration. Despite the attention, Ryan and Julia chose to remain low-key. They declined invitations to grand ceremonies and speeches, preferring instead to continue their quiet lives aboard the Starlight Voyager. Delivering supplies to remote colonies suited them just fine. It was predictable, peaceful, and allowed them to avoid the spotlight. One evening, as they shared a meal in the cramped galley, Julia brought up a question that had been on her mind. Do you think we'll ever run into trouble like that again? Ryan shrugged, taking a sip of coffee. Probably. Space is full of surprises. But if we do, we'll handle it. Just like last time. Julia smiled, feeling reassured. Yeah, and if all else fails, we've always got coffee. They laughed, the sound echoing through the ship. Life aboard the Starlight Voyager returned to its usual rhythm, filled with long journeys, random repairs, and plenty of caffeine-fueled conversations. But something had changed. They carried with them the knowledge that they had faced the impossible, and prevailed. As the stars streaked past outside the viewport, Ryan raised his thermos in a silent toast. To coffee, he said quietly, and to whatever comes next. Julia joined him, raising an imaginary cup. To coffee, courage, and the galaxy's luckiest engineers. In the end, their story wasn't about fame or glory. It was about resilience, teamwork, and the belief that even the smallest acts of creativity and determination could make a difference. And as the Starlight Voyager disappeared into the depths of space, its crew remained ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, armed, with nothing more than hope, ingenuity, and a whole lot of caffeine.